The Galactic Senate chamber was massive. It was shaped like a giant circle, with thousands of seats rising up in rings toward the ceiling. Bright lights moved slowly across the walls, changing colors from blue to white to a soft red. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in their seats. Some had scales. Some had many eyes. Some were tall and thin like reeds. Some were short and wide like boulders. They came from many different worlds, many different suns, many different lives. But today, all of them were focused on one single thing. A soft alarm was beeping. It was not loud, but it was steady like a heartbeat. Every few seconds, a red light blinked above the main platform in the center of the room. On that platform stood a tall, thin creature with long arms and a narrow face. His name was Speaker Vren, and he was the leader of the Galactic Senate. His skin was a pale green color, and his eyes were large and black, like a bug's eyes. He held a small device in his hand. It showed the final vote count. The room was quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Everyone was waiting. Speaker Vren lifted his head and looked around the chamber. Then he spoke, and his voice echoed through the whole room. "The vote has been counted," he said. 189 votes for, 3 votes against. He paused for a moment. The silence in the room grew heavier. "The motion is approved," he said. "The human species is hereby voted for extinction." For a moment, nothing happened. Nobody cheered. Nobody cried out. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath. Then, slowly, sound began to fill the chamber. Some delegates clapped quietly, relieved that a dangerous species would soon be gone forever. Others looked down at their hands, their faces heavy with guilt. A few delegates from smaller, weaker worlds turned their heads away, unable to watch. This was not a happy day for everyone, but the vote was done. It could not be undone. High up in the chamber, near the back, sat a single human. His name was Elias Cole, and he was the ambassador for planet Earth. He was not a large man. He was not covered in armor or weapons. He wore a simple dark blue suit, plain and unremarkable. He sat alone at a small wooden desk, with only a glass of water and a single notebook in front of him. Every eye in the room slowly turned toward him. Whispers spread through the crowd like wind through tall grass. What would the human do? Would he scream? Would he beg for his species to be saved? Would he cry or shout or fall to his knees? Elias did none of these things. He sat still for a moment, looking at Speaker Vren on the platform. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair. His shoulders relaxed. His hands rested calmly on the desk in front of him. And then he smiled. It was not a big smile. It was not a wild, crazy smile. It was calm and quiet, like a man who had just heard good news, not bad news. His eyes did not show fear. They did not show sadness. They showed something else entirely, something that looked almost like patience. A murmur spread through the Senate chamber. Delegates leaned toward each other, whispering in confusion. Near the front row, a delegate from the Phyrexian species, a large creature covered in thick gray scales, turned to the alien sitting beside him. His voice was low, but sharp with unease. "Why is he smiling?" The Phyrexian delegate whispered. "Does he not understand what has just happened? His entire species has been voted for destruction." The alien beside him, a smaller creature with soft blue skin and wide, worried eyes, shook her head slowly. "I do not know," she whispered back, "but I do not like it." On the platform, Speaker Vren also noticed the human's strange reaction. He had expected shouting. He had expected pleading. He had expected fear. He had seen many species react to bad news during his long years as speaker, and never before had he seen someone smile after hearing they would be destroyed. He studied Elias carefully, his large black eyes narrowing. There was something unsettling about that calm smile. It did not fit. It was wrong. Somehow, like a piece from a different puzzle. "Ambassador Cole," Speaker Vren said slowly, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the chamber. "Do you have anything to say?" The whole chamber fell silent again. Every alien turned to look at the lone human, sitting quietly among them. Elias did not stand up right away. He took a slow sip of water from his glass, set it down gently, and only then did he rise to his feet. He was not tall. He was not physically impressive compared to the many powerful species around him. But when he stood, There was something steady in the way he carried himself, something that made the room feel just a little smaller. He looked around to see of alien faces, at all the eyes staring back at him, waiting. And still he smiled. "No," Elias said calmly. "I have nothing to say right now." A wave of confusion spread through the chamber. Delegates exchanged glances, unsure what to make of his answer. Was this fear disguised as calmness? Was he in shock? Or did he simply not understand the seriousness of what had just happened to his people? Speaker Vren tilted his head slightly, studying the human even more closely now. "Your species has just been voted for extinction, Ambassador," he said slowly, as if repeating the words might finally make Elias understand. "Do you not wish to argue? To beg for mercy? To ask the Senate to reconsider?" Elias's smile did not fade. If anything, it grew just slightly wider. "No," he said again, his voice calm and steady. "I don't think that will be necessary." He sat back down in his chair, folded his hands on the desk, and said nothing more. The chamber buzzed with confusion and unease. Nobody understood what the human meant. Nobody understood why he was not afraid. But deep in the back of many alien minds, a small, cold feeling began to grow, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this vote had been a terrible mistake. 6 months before the vote, humanity had been a mystery to the rest of the galaxy. Nobody in the Senate had ever heard of Earth. Nobody knew about its people, its cities, or its long, strange history. Then, one quiet morning, a small human research ship crossed into a part of space that belonged to the Phyrexian Empire, and everything changed. The Phyrexians were a proud and powerful species. They had large gray bodies covered in thick scales, and they had built one of the strongest fleets in the known galaxy. When their scout ships found a small human vessel drifting near their border, they expected to find nothing more than a lost, harmless craft. Instead, they found something that shocked them. The human ship was old. It was slow. Its weapons were weak compared to Phyrexian technology. And yet, when the Phyrexian scouts tried to capture it, the little ship fought back. It did not surrender. It did not run in fear. The human crew, badly outmatched, still tried to defend themselves with everything they had, right up until the very end. The Phyrexian commander who led that mission, a proud warrior named Counselor Threx, was both amazed and deeply unsettled by what he saw. In his report to the Senate, he described the humans not as weak, but as dangerous in a different way, reckless, aggressive, and willing to fight even when victory was impossible. To Threx, this was a warning sign, not a sign of honor. Word of the encounter spread quickly across the galaxy. Soon, other species began to study Earth from a distance, watching human television signals, old radio broadcasts, and historical records that had drifted out into space over many decades. What they found troubled them even more. They saw humanity's long history of wars. They saw powerful weapons, built again and again throughout the centuries. They saw a species that argued, fought, and struggled among itself, yet somehow always came out stronger and more advanced after each conflict. To many alien leaders, humanity looked less like a new neighbor and more like a growing storm, a species with weapons that could destroy cities, a species with hunger to explore, expand, and grow, no matter the danger, a species that, if left alone, might one day become too powerful to stop. Fear spread through the Senate like a fire through dry grass. Species after species began to speak out against humanity, warning that this new, unpredictable race could not be trusted. Counselor Threx became one of the loudest voices calling for action. He stood before the Senate many times, warning that history had shown, again and again, that humans could not be reasoned with, only feared. They fight even when it is hopeless, Threx said during one early Senate meeting, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. What kind of species does that? A species that does not value its own survival is far more dangerous than one that does. We must act before they grow too strong to stop. Not every species agreed. A few smaller worlds, ones who had suffered under Phyrexian rule themselves, spoke up in humanity's defense. They pointed out that humans had never actually attacked anyone in the galaxy. Every human ship encountered so far had only been exploring, not invading. But these voices were few, and they were quiet compared to the growing fear that filled the chamber. Meanwhile, far away, on a small blue planet at the edge of known space. Humanity had just learned that it was not alone in the universe. And along with that discovery came a warning. The wider galaxy already feared them, and that fear was growing every single day. Earth's leaders held emergency meetings. Scientists worked around the clock. Studying the small amount of alien technology they had managed to recover from a damaged Threxian scout ship left behind after the first encounter. Military leaders argued about what to do. Should they show strength, to prove they could not be pushed around, or should they show peace, to calm the fear spreading among the stars? In the middle of all this chaos, one man remained calm. Elias Cole had spent most of his life working as a negotiator, solving conflicts between nations back on Earth. He was known for his patience, his sharp mind, and his ability to stay calm even in the most difficult situations. When Earth's leaders searched for someone to represent humanity to the wider galaxy, his name came up again and again. Elias did not want the position at first. He knew how dangerous it would be to stand in front of species far more powerful than humanity, especially with so much fear already spreading about Earth. But he also knew that if humanity did nothing, if no one spoke for them, the fear would only grow worse. Someone needed to represent Earth, calmly and wisely, no matter what challenges lay ahead. He accepted the role. Before he left Earth, Elias met privately with a small group of scientists, military leaders, and government officials. The meeting was quiet and serious. Nobody in that room fully trusted the aliens who now knew about Earth's existence. They understood that first impressions would matter more than anything. They already think we are dangerous, one general said during the meeting, his voice heavy with worry. If we show any weakness, they may see it as an invitation to attack. If we show any strength, they may see it as proof we deserve to be destroyed. Elias listened carefully to everyone in the room. When it was finally his turn to speak, his words were simple and steady. Then we do neither, he said. We show them patience. We show them wisdom. And quietly, without anyone noticing, we make sure that no matter what they decide, humanity will still be standing when it's over. Nobody in that room fully understood what Elias meant at the time. But over the following months, as Elias traveled to stars to represent humanity before the Galactic Senate, a second, secret plan slowly began to take shape back on Earth, one that very few people knew about, and one that would soon prove far more important than anyone in that meeting room could have guessed. Elias Cole's quarters aboard the Senate space station were small and plain, nothing like the grand rooms given to ambassadors from more powerful species. He did not complain about this. In fact, he barely seemed to notice. Each morning, he woke early, made a simple cup of coffee using supplies brought from Earth, and sat quietly by the small window, looking out at the stars before his long day of meetings began. His closest companion during those difficult months was a young woman named Dr. Mira-Chun, a brilliant scientist who had been sent along as his advisor. She was sharp, quick-thinking, and often nervous about the danger surrounding them. While Elias remained calm through every insult and threat thrown at humanity in the Senate halls, Mira often found herself lying awake at night, worried about what might happen next. One evening, after another long and difficult Senate session, Mira sat across from Elias in their small share quarters. She had barely touched her food. "They hate us," she said quietly. "Every single day, more of them stand up and call us dangerous. Threx keeps pushing for a vote. Elias, I don't think we can talk our way out of this one." Elias set down his fork and looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "I know," he said simply. Mira stared at him, confused. "You know? That's it? That's all you have to say?" "I've known for a while," Elias said, his voice quiet but sure. "Fear like this doesn't go away just because we're polite. Threx has already made up his mind. Most of the Senate has too. No speech I give is going to change that now." "Then what are we doing here?" Mira asked, her voice rising with frustration. "If you already know they're going to vote against us, why do we keep coming to these meetings? Why do you keep smiling and shaking hands with people who want us destroyed?" Elias leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before he answered. "Because they need to see us," he said. "They need to see a human being who is calm, who is reasonable, who does not scream or beg or threaten. When this is over, however it ends, I want every species in this galaxy to remember that humanity faced this moment with dignity. Mira shook her head slowly. That's not going to save us, Elias. A small, quiet smile crossed Elias's face, the same calm smile that would later confuse an entire Senate chamber. No, he agreed. That's not what's going to save us. Myra's eyes narrowed. Then what is... Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Mira would remember for the rest of her life. Humanity has never once, in all our history, waited quietly for someone else to decide our fate. We never have, and we're not about to start now. Before Mira could ask what he meant, Elias stood up, walked to the small window, and looked out at the distant stars, his expression calm but distant, as if his mind was already somewhere far away. Over the following weeks, Elias attended Senate meeting after Senate meeting. He listened patiently as alien leaders gave long speeches about humanity's dangerous history. He answered every accusation calmly, without anger, even when some delegates insulted humanity directly to his face. Many alien species began to see him as strange, not weak, but not aggressive either. He simply did not react the way they expected a frightened, doomed species to react. Counselor Threx, in particular, grew more and more suspicious of the calm human ambassador. During one private meeting between the two of them, arranged to discuss possible peace terms, Threx studied Elias closely, his large reptilian eyes narrowed with distrust. You are very calm, Ambassador, Threx said slowly, for someone whose entire species may soon be erased from existence. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Would you prefer I scream and cry, Counselor? Would that make you feel better about the vote you're planning? Threx's scaled face twisted slightly, an expression that might have been anger or perhaps something closer to unease. I would prefer honesty, he said. What are you hiding, human? No species reacts to a death sentence with such peace. Either you do not understand what is happening, or you know something the rest of us do not. Elias allowed a small smile to form on his lips, the same calm, unreadable smile that would later confuse the entire Senate chamber. Maybe, he said quietly, you should ask yourself why a species with no army, no great fleet, and no powerful weapon still refuses to be afraid of you. Threx said nothing, but his eyes stayed fixed on Elias for a long moment, clearly troubled by the answer. Later that night, back in their quarters, Mira confronted Elias again, her patience finally running out. You need to tell me what's going on, she said firmly. I've seen the reports from home. Something is happening on Earth, isn't it? Something you haven't told me. Elias looked at her for a long moment, weighing how much he could say. Finally, he sat down across from her and spoke quietly. There are things happening back home that even I don't fully know the details of, he admitted. But before I left Earth, I was told one thing, and one thing only. No matter what the Senate decides, no matter what vote they make, humanity will not disappear quietly. Myra's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means, Elias said slowly, that while the Senate has been debating whether or not humanity deserves to exist, humanity has not been sitting still. We've been busy. Before Mira could ask anything else, a soft alert chimed on Elias's communicator. He looked down at the message, and for the briefest moment, something flickered behind his calm expression. Not fear, but sharp, focused attention. Then, just as quickly, the calm returned. The final vote has been scheduled, he said quietly, standing up from his chair. 3 days from now. Mira felt her stomach tighten with fear. But Elias, strangely, looked almost relieved. Good, he said softly, almost to himself. That gives him just enough time to finish. 3 days passed quickly, and soon the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The Galactic Senate chamber was fuller than it had ever been. Every seat was filled. Delegates from species across the galaxy had traveled great distances just to witness this historic vote. News of the human question, as it had come to be called, had spread to nearly every corner of known space. Elias Cole walked into the chamber that morning looking exactly as he always did, calm, quiet, dressed in his simple dark blue suit. Mira walked beside him, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, her heart pounding with worry. Elias, on the other hand, walked with the same steady pace he always used, as if this were just another ordinary day. As they entered the massive circular chamber, thousands of eyes turned toward them. Whispers spread instantly through the crowd. Some delegates looked at Elias with pity. Others looked at him with suspicion. A few, mostly Phyrexians and their allies, looked at him with open dislike. Elias took his seat at the small desk near the back of the chamber, the same seat he had used during every previous meeting. Mira sat beside him, her leg bouncing nervously beneath the desk. Elias placed a single glass of water in front of himself, along with his notebook, just as he always did. Speaker Vren stood at the central platform, waiting for the chamber to settle into silence. When the last murmurs finally faded, he raised a hand and spoke. "Today, this Senate will vote on a matter of great importance," Vren announced, his voice carrying across the massive room. "The question before us is simple. Does the human species pose a threat too great to be allowed to continue? Before the vote begins, any delegate wishing to speak may do so now." Several delegates rose to speak. Most of them repeated familiar arguments. Humanity's long history of war, its unpredictable nature, its rapid growth despite limited resources and technology. A few smaller species, mostly ones who would face injustice under powerful empires like the Phyrexians, spoke cautiously in humanity's defense, though their voices were quiet compared to the louder, more powerful ones. Then Counselor Threx rose to speak, and the chamber fell into a deeper silence. "I have studied this species for many months," Threx began, his voice deep and steady. "I have watched their history. I have seen their wars, their weapons, their endless hunger for more land, more power, more control. And yet, even now, faced with total destruction, their ambassador sits calmly among us, showing no fear at all." He turned slowly, his reptilian eyes locking onto Elias. "This is not the behavior of a weak or harmless species. This is the behavior of a species that either does not understand the dangers in, or one that is far more dangerous than we currently believe. I say we cannot afford to wait and find out which one is true." A wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. Many delegates nodded in agreement. Mira glanced at Elias nervously, but he sat completely still, his expression calm, his eyes fixed forward, giving nothing away. Finally, Speaker Vren raised his hand once more. "The debate is closed," he announced. "We will now proceed to the vote." The chamber grew tense. Small screens near each delegate's seat lit up, showing options to vote for or against humanity's extinction. One by one, delegates began casting their votes. The process was slow, and every second felt heavier than the last. Myra's hands trembled slightly as she watched the numbers slowly rise on the large display above Speaker Vren's platform. Throughout the entire process, Elias remained perfectly still, his eyes calm, his breathing steady. He did not look nervous. He did not look afraid. If anything, he looked almost patient, like a man waiting for a delayed train, mildly inconvenienced but not truly worried. Finally, the voting ended. Speaker Vren looked down at the final results on his device, and the chamber fell into complete silence, waiting for his announcement. This was the same moment from the very beginning of the story, now shown in full. "The vote has been counted," Speaker Vren said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. 189 votes for, 3 votes against. He paused, letting the silence stretch for a long, heavy moment. "The motion is approved," he finally said. "The human species is hereby voted for extinction." The chamber buzzed with quiet reactions. Some relieved, some ashamed, some simply stunned that it had really happened. All eyes slowly turned toward the back of the chamber, toward the lone human sitting quietly among them. Elias took a slow sip of water. He set the glass down gently, and then, just as before, he leaned back in his chair and a calm, quiet smile spread across his face. Speaker Vren studied him carefully, the same unease from before returning to his sharp black eyes. "Ambassador Cole," he said slowly, "do you have anything to say?" This time, Elias did not simply say no and sit back down. This time, he rose slowly to his feet, buttoned his jacket with quiet calmness, and looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring back at him. "Yes, actually," Elias said, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the silent chamber. "I do have something to say." Every delegate leaned forward slightly, eager to finally hear what the strange, unshaken human ambassador had to say after receiving a death sentence for his entire species. Elias let the silence stretch for just a moment longer before he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "You have made a mistake today," he said simply. A very serious mistake, but it is not too late to fix it. The chamber erupted into confused whispers. Counselor Threx rose sharply from his seat, his scaled face twisted with anger and disbelief. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" he demanded, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Elias turned to look directly at him, his expression calm, almost gentle. "No, Counselor," he said quietly. "It's a warning, and I would advise every species in this room to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The chamber fell completely silent once more, thousands of alien eyes fixed on the single human standing calmly among them, waiting to hear what he would say next. The silence in the chamber stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Every delegate, every species, every pair of eyes in that massive room was fixed on Elias Cole. Even Speaker Vren, who had led thousands of Senate sessions over his long life, found himself leaning forward slightly, waiting for the human's next words. Elias took a slow breath, then began to speak, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent chamber. 6 months ago, he said, your scouts found a small, damaged human ship near the Threxian border. You saw an old vessel, weak weapons, and a crew that fought back even when there was no chance of winning. Counselor Threx called this reckless, dangerous, a warning sign. He paused, looking around the room slowly. But you were looking at the wrong thing, Elias continued. You didn't see a species preparing for war. You saw a species that just learned, for the very first time, that it was not alone in this galaxy, and that the galaxy already saw it as a threat to be destroyed. Murmurs spread to the crowd, but Elias raised a hand gently, and the chamber quieted again. When my people learn about the fears spreading among your worlds, he said, we face a choice. We could show you weakness and hope you would pity us, or we could show you strength and risk proving your fears correct. Neither option would have saved us, so instead we chose a third path. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, placing it gently on his desk. A soft blue light blinked on top of it. While I sat in this chamber for months, listening to speeches about how dangerous humanity might become, Elias said, my people were not idle. We were not hiding in fear, waiting for your decision. We were working, quietly, carefully, preparing for exactly this outcome. Counselor Threx's scaled face darkened. Preparing what, Ambassador? Weapons? An invasion? Elias shook his head slowly. No, Counselor. We were preparing a defense. A very good one. He pressed a small button on the device, and suddenly a soft holographic image flickered to life above his desk, visible to the entire chamber. It showed images of Earth, not the primitive, struggling planet many aliens had imagined, but something far more advanced. Massive shipyards hidden deep beneath oceans and mountains. Engineers and scientists working around the clock. New ships, sleek and unfamiliar in design, being constructed in secret. Gasps spread through the chamber. Even Speaker Vren's calm expression cracked slightly with surprise. This is impossible, Threx said, his voice sharp with disbelief. Our scouts reported no unusual activity on your homeworld. Your fleet remained small and outdated. This must be some kind of trick. Elias's calm smile returned. Counselor, did it occur to you that we knew your scout were watching? That we made certain they saw exactly what we wanted them to see? An old, weak, unprepared species, unworthy of concern? While your attention stayed fixed on our visible fleet, our true efforts were happening far from prying eyes. He gestured toward the hologram, where new images appeared, small alien delegations from several lesser-known species, secretly meeting with human representatives in hidden locations. You are not the only ones in this galaxy who have been mistreated by the Phyrexian Empire and its allies, Elias continued. While you spent months debating our fate, we spent that same time listening to others, smaller species, quieter voices, who have long lived in fear of Phyrexian power. We offer them something you never did, respect and a fair partnership. The chamber erupted into chaotic murmurs. Several delegates from smaller species shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking almost guilty, as though a secret they had kept was now being revealed to the entire Senate. Threx's eyes narrowed dangerously. You are suggesting an alliance? Against the Senate itself. No, Elias said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. I am telling you the truth. Counselor. We are not your enemies. We never wanted to be. But when a room full of strangers votes to erase your entire species from existence, only a fool would sit back and hope for the best. We prepared not to attack you, but to survive you, and if necessary, to make sure that any attempt to carry out this vote would come at a cost far greater than any of you are willing to pay. Speaker Vren finally spoke, his voice quieter now, some of his earlier confidence shaken. Ambassador Cole, are you saying that an attack on Earth would fail? Elias turned to face him directly. I am saying, Speaker, that an attack on Earth would not be the quick, easy victory your fleet commanders have promised you. I am saying that many ships would be lost, many lives on both sides would be lost, and in the end, humanity would still be standing, bruised, perhaps, but very much alive. And the galaxy would remember forever that the Senate chose destruction over understanding, when a better path was always available. The chamber was silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, filled with doubt and unease rather than simple curiosity. Mira, sitting beside Elias, stared at him in stunned amazement. She had known something was happening back on Earth, but even she had not fully understood the scale of what her people had accomplished in such a short time. Counselor Threx stood rigid, his claws pressing tightly against the edge of his seat. For the first time since anyone could remember, the powerful Threxian counselor looked uncertain. Even if what you say is true, Threx said slowly, the vote has already passed. The decision has been made. Elias nodded calmly. Yes, Counselor, it has. And my people are prepared to accept whatever comes next. But before your fleets are sent to carry out this decision, I ask the Senate to consider one final question. He looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of hundreds of delegates, his voice steady and calm. Is destroying humanity truly worth the cost you will pay to do it? Or would it be wiser even now to reconsider? No one answered him. The chamber remained silent, filled with uncertainty, doubt, and for the first time, real fear. Not humanity's weapons, but the terrible mistake they might have just made. The Senate chamber remained silent for a long moment after Elias finished speaking. Then, slowly, the quiet uncertainty turned into loud, chaotic argument. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding the vote be reconsidered, others insisting that the extinction order must still be carried out, no matter what threats or warnings a human ambassador gave. Counselor Threx rose to his feet, his voice booming over the noise. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned the Senate about. The humans are using fear and clever words to delay their fate. We cannot allow ourselves to be tricked by a desperate species trying to save itself. Many delegates nodded in agreement, their fear of humanity now mixing dangerously with anger at being outsmarted. Speaker Vren tried to restore order, calling for calm, but the chamber remained tense and divided. In the end, despite Elias's warning, the Senate's official decision could not be undone through debate alone. The vote had already passed, and powerful voices like Threx's pushed hard for immediate action, refusing to appear weak or hesitant in front of the entire galaxy. Within hours, orders were given. A massive Threxian battle fleet, one of the most powerful in known space, was dispatched toward Earth to carry out the Senate's decision. Back on Earth, humanity had been waiting for this moment. Alarms sounded across the planet as early warning systems detected the approaching alien fleet. But instead of panic, there was calm, practiced readiness. This was not the first time humanity had prepared for a coming storm. High above Earth's atmosphere, a defense network hidden for months suddenly came to life. Satellites that had appeared old and harmless revealed advanced technology within. Hidden shipyards opened their massive doors, releasing sleek new vessels into space, ready to defend their homeworld. Small, allied ships from other species, the same quiet allies Elias had spoken about in the Senate, appeared alongside the human fleet, having secretly traveled to Earth's system in the days before the attack. When the Phyrexian fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, expecting to find a weak, defenseless planet, they instead found a coordinated, prepared defense force waiting for them. The Phyrexian fleet commander, a proud and experienced warrior named Admiral Core, stared at his sensor readings in disbelief. "This is not possible," he muttered. "Our report said their fleet was small, outdated." His communications officer, equally stunned, replied nervously, "Admiral, We're detecting weapon signatures unlike anything in our database. And, sir, several of the ships alongside the humans are registered to smaller allied species. It appears they have formed a coalition. Admiral Cole's claws tightened around the edge of his command chair. He had been sent to carry out a simple task: destroy a weak, defenseless world. Instead, he now faced a defended system, backed by unexpected allies, and armed with technology his scouts had never detected. Still, pride and duty pushed him forward. "We have our orders," he said firmly. "Prepare for engagement." The battle that followed was fierce, but did not unfold the way Admiral Cole had expected. Human ships, though smaller than the massive Threxian warships, moved with incredible speed and precision, striking weak points in the Threxian formation before retreating just as quickly. The Allied ships, familiar with Threxian tactics from years of living under their rule, provided crucial support, guiding the human fleet toward the enemy's most vulnerable positions. Rather than a full, destructive war, the battle quickly became something else: a demonstration. Human ships disabled engines instead of destroying ships outright. They targeted weapon systems, not crew quarters. Every move seemed carefully calculated, not to annihilate the Phyrexian fleet, but to prove a single undeniable point. Humanity could not be easily destroyed, and any attempt to do so would come at a devastating cost. Within a few short hours, more than half of Admiral Cole's fleet had been disabled, stranded, or forced into retreat. His flagship itself sustained heavy damage, forcing him to make an impossible decision. He could continue fighting, likely losing his remaining ships and countless lives, or he could withdraw and admit defeat before the entire galaxy. Staring at the wreckage of his once mighty fleet, Admiral Cole finally spoke, his voice heavy with reluctant respect. "Signal a retreat," he said quietly. "We are leaving the system." Back in the Senate chamber, delegates watched the battle unfold through live reports and censored data transmitted across the galaxy. What they saw shocked them deeply. A supposedly weak, primitive species had successfully defended itself against one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. Not through mindless destruction, but through careful strategy, unexpected alliances, and remarkable restraint. Counselor Threx sat frozen in his seat, watching the reports with growing horror. His fleet, the pride of his empire, had been humbled by a species he had sworn was too weak and primitive to resist. Elias Cole, still standing calmly in the Senate chamber, watched the same reports with a quiet, steady expression. When the final confirmation came through, Threxian fleet in full retreat, minimal casualties on both sides, a soft murmur of disbelief spread to the chamber once more. Speaker Vren turned slowly to look at Elias, his expression a mixture of shock, respect, and deep unease. "You knew this would happen," he said quietly. "You knew your people could defend themselves as well." Elias nodded calmly. "I hope they could," he admitted honestly. "But hope alone does not win battles, Speaker. Preparation does. My people spent months building alliances, developing technology, and planning carefully, precisely because we knew a day like this might come." He looked around the silent chamber, meeting the stunned gazes of hundreds of delegates who, only hours earlier, had confidently voted for humanity's complete destruction. "You wanted to know if humanity was dangerous," Elias said quietly. "Today you have your answer. We are dangerous when threatened, but we are also patient, careful, and willing to show restraint, even when provoked. The question now is not whether humanity can defend itself. The question is whether the Senate is wise enough to build a better future with us, instead of against us." No one in the chamber spoke. For the first time since the vote had passed, doubt and quiet respect began to replace fear and anger, spreading slowly among the shocked and humbled delegates. In the days following the failed attack, the Galactic Senate found itself facing a crisis unlike anything in its long history. News of the battle had spread across the galaxy at incredible speed. Every species, powerful or small, now knew the same story. The Senate had voted to destroy a species it barely understood, only to be humbled by that same species in a matter of hours. Trust in the Senate's judgment, once unquestioned, began to crack. Smaller species who had long feared speaking out against powerful empires like the Threxians suddenly found their voices growing stronger, encouraged by what humanity had shown was possible. Whispers of change spread through the Senate halls, whispers that had never existed before. 3 days after the battle, Elias Cole was called before the Senate once again. This time, however, the chamber felt different. The confident, dismissive attitude that once filled the room had been replaced by something quieter, more careful. Delegates who had once looked at Elias with pity or suspicion now watched him with a mixture of respect and caution. Speaker Vren stood at the platform, his expression far more humble than during the previous session. "Ambassador Cole," he said slowly, "the Senate has spent the past several days in deep discussion. Many of us have been forced to reconsider decisions we believed were certain." Elias nodded calmly, waiting patiently as always. "There are some among us," Vren continued, glancing briefly toward Counselor Threx, who sat silently, his proud posture noticeably diminished, "who still believe humanity remains a threat that must be dealt with. But there are many more now who recognize that our fear led us to a decision we were not wise enough to make." The speaker took a deep breath before continuing. "This Senate wishes to formally reverse the extinction order placed upon your species." A wave of quiet murmurs spread through the chamber, though this time the mood felt different, less shocked, more accepting, as if many delegates had already expected this outcome. Elias remained silent for a moment, considering his next words carefully. Then he rose to his feet, his calm expression unreadable, just as it had been since the very first day of his time in that chamber. "I appreciate the Senate's willingness to admit its mistake," Elias said finally. "But an apology alone is not enough to build real trust between our peoples." Whispers spread once more, some delegates shifting uncomfortably, uncertain of what the human ambassador might demand next. "My people do not want revenge," Elias continued, his voice steady and clear. "We do not want to see the Senate humiliated, nor do we wish to rule over anyone, the way some empires have ruled over others." He glanced briefly, though not unkindly, toward Counselor Threx. "What we want is simple, a fair place among the stars, a voice equal to any other species in this chamber, and a promise that decisions as serious as the one made here will never again be made out of fear alone, but through understanding." Speaker Vren studied Elias for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That seems a very reasonable request, Ambassador." Over the following weeks, the Galactic Senate began drafting new agreements, formally recognizing humanity as an equal member among the stars. Old fears did not disappear overnight, but slowly, carefully, a new relationship began to grow, one built not on dominance or fear, but on mutual respect. Even Counselor Threx, though still proud and cautious, requested a private meeting with Elias shortly after the formal agreements were signed. The two sat quietly in a small room aboard the Senate station, the tension between them still present but softened. "I still do not fully trust your species, Ambassador," Threx admitted honestly. Elias offered a small, understanding smile. "That's all right, Counselor. Trust takes time to build. But I hope, in time, you'll come to see that humanity's strength was never something to fear, only something to respect." Threx studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "in time." Months later, Elias stood once again in the great Senate chamber, though this time the atmosphere felt entirely different. Sunlight like artificial light filled the room warmly, and the chamber buzzed not with fear or tension, but with the normal, steady hum of a functioning, diverse council of worlds. Mira stood beside him, smiling proudly as she watched delegates from dozens of species go about their daily business, humanity's own representatives now seated among them as equals. "You knew this would happen," Mira said quietly, echoing Speaker Vren's earlier words. "From the very beginning, didn't you? Even before the vote." Elias looked out over the busy chamber, his calm smile returning once more. "I didn't know for certain," he admitted honestly, "but I believed in my people. I believed that if we stayed patient, stayed prepared, and never lost sight of who we truly were, we would find a way through, no matter how dark things looked at first." He turned to look at Mira, his expression thoughtful. "Fear makes people and species do foolish things, but patience, preparation, and quiet strength, those can overcome almost anything." As Elias turned back to look out over the chamber one final time, his mind drifted back to that very first day, the day the Senate had voted for humanity's extinction, and he had simply smiled. Now, standing among the stars as an equal, He finally understood the true meaning behind that smile. It was not fear disguised as calm. It was not simple stubbornness. It was quiet, unshaken faith. Faith in his people, faith in their strength, and faith that no matter how impossible the odds seemed, humanity would always find a way to endure. And as the Galactic Senate continued its work around him, filled now with new voices, new alliances, and a future built on understanding rather than fear, Elias Cole allowed himself one final, quiet moment of satisfaction. Humanity had not just survived. It had earned its place among the stars.